Nature, the greatest force on Earth, untamable and uncontrollable, the cause of some of the greatest disasters on planet Earth, disasters that we can't control. And it's this feeling of smallness and insignificance that scares us, not having control to the horrors that we are subjected to. But what happens when man attempts to control nature? What happens when we create our own monsters? When the destruction, the deaths, are our fault? Today, we'll take an in-depth look into one of the biggest man-made disasters in the entire human race, as we discuss the causes, the consequences, and how to never, ever make the same mistakes again, as we explore the horrors of Chernobyl. However, before Chernobyl, there was Pripyat. Located 90 kilometers away from Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, the town of Pripyat begins construction. Pripyat was a very special town. It was originally being built for the workers of Chernobyl. In fact, it was one of the famous atomic towns that the Soviet Union had at the time. Being built at the same time as Chernobyl, 2 kilometers away from the power plant, it was a very interesting endeavor, built for an estimated population of 75,000, but only getting 48,000. Weddings were a very common practice within Chernobyl. In fact, there were plans for a special salon to be built for the newlyweds, though it never actually got built. As customary, the construction was declared an all-union shock work project, built quickly by super productive brigades. Even though it was a small city, Pripyat had all the necessary items for a Soviet town at the time. Chernobyl and Pripyat were designed for each other. They were being built at the same time, in fact, and if you think about it, it was kind of like a love story. They were born together, they were raised together, they died together. Test day at Chernobyl. Now fully built and operational, the task was simple: to determine whether cooling of the core would continue to be ensured in the event of a loss of power. You see, nuclear reactors produce energy a very similar way as power plants. They both use water, which they boil, to generate steam, which in turn turns on a generator, which makes electricity. Simple, right? The only difference is the fuel. You see, power plants use fossil fuels like the ones that you use in your car. It's a very different story with nuclear energy, however. Nuclear fission, the process of splitting a nucleus into producing heat to turn water into steam. Nuclear plants use this technique. However, in order to do this, they need a very special fuel. Uranium, a natural radioactive element found inside a lot of rocks. And inside each uranium pellet, you will find millions upon millions of uranium nuclei. Once split, tons of energy is released. Some of it is radioactive, but most of it is kinetic. And this is what power plants use and take advantage of. However, if not used properly, it can cause a lot of damage. That's why there are control rods, which are used to moderate and to control, as it says, the energy that is released. If not used properly though, well, you don't want to know what happens. 1:06 a.m. The shutdown of the reactor began. This was an experiment that was supposed to be performed last year, but they couldn't actually do it, so they had to wait until they have new voltage regulators in order to perform the experiment. And here is where the first mistake was found. There was a lack of communication from both the team in charge of the test and the personnel in charge of the safety of the nuclear reactor. The security measures that were supposed to be there were never actually there. How can you prepare for something that you didn't know was going to happen? 3:47, the reactor power stopped at 16,000 thermal megawatts. 14 hours, the emergency core cooling system, or ECCS, was isolated.
Now, even though the ECCS wasn't there, it really couldn't have stopped what was gonna happen, although it would have lessened the damage.
23 hours and 10 minutes. A power reduction is asked for.
The reactor was already at half power, and they wanted it to go lower.
At 24 hours, it's agreed to lower power.
Enter the first horseman of the apocalypse.
5 minutes the next day, with power level at 720 megawatts, it continued to decrease.
Going below 700 megawatts was forbidden. It's like signing your own death sentence. It's unsafe and too risky to work at that condition.
28 minutes, power levels decreased to 500 megawatts. Control was transferred from the local to the automatic regulating system. A malfunction causes the power to fall to 30 megawatts.
But the games begin.
1 a.m. The reactor rises to 200 megawatts and stabilizes. The required operating reactivity margin has been violated.
It was at this moment that they should have called quits.
A circulation pump was activated to let water flow through the core, and then a second one. The water removed heat quicker, but they didn't stop. They delivered so much that the flow exceeded their allowed limits.
At 1 hour, 23 minutes and 40 seconds, the emergency button was pressed and the control rods started to enter the core. Reactivity started to elevate. 3 seconds later, the raid emergency protection systems signal on. Power had exceeded 530 megawatts. The fuel elements ruptured, leading to increased steam generation. Fuel channels got damaged. The reactor support plate got detached. The control rods jammed. It was complete chaos. 2 explosions were reported. The first, an initial steam explosion, followed by a second one. It got out of control. Firefighters were called upon to extinguish burning segments, each team designed to combat different features of the fire and radioactive release. Helicopters were sent to release clay and sand, but they didn't actually hit the target. In fact, they worked as insulators, which made it even worse. Chernobyl was beyond saving. Evacuation had begun.
Pripyat began evacuating everyone they could, and even though they may have left Chernobyl, something left with them.
What, you thought it was over? It only just begun.
Children had been drinking milk from cows that had eaten contaminated grass, causing a rise of thyroid cancer in children.
Animals weren't left out either. In fact, fish received a lot of radiocesium, which is a radioactive isotope of the element cesium. And this led to a lot of mortality of mammals. And in fact, it also led to a lot of reproductive losses from both plants and animals alike.
The economy took a hit as well. 784,320 agricultural hectares were taken away from production, as well as 694,200 hectares of forest for timber production.
More than 350,000 people were relocated away from the contaminated areas. In fact, 116,000 people were relocated immediately.
The world mourned and prayed. Many feared for their own lives. Others were lucky to stay alive, and others just wished that they had died.
Now, 30 years later, radiation has just started to clear out, with some parts of Pripyat and Chernobyl open to visit, now laying as a reminder of the disaster that once happened, a symbol of our own arrogance, and as a lesson of what happens when we bite off more than we can chew, a lesson showing us that nature will always be in control over us, and not the other way around.